morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Mark Speed. I'm the Director of Bands at Clemson University in Clemson, South Carolina, and also the President of the College Band Directors National Association, CBDNA. And it's my pleasure to be with you this morning back in Texas for the next 45 minutes or so to present this session on how the virus is going to affect us and our band operations this fall. We are very fortunate to have with us this morning the lead scientist in our performing arts aerosol study, which you probably heard about. I put a link to it in the chat window there, so you can check that out later. This is Dr. Shelley Miller. She's professor of mechanical engineering and the faculty of environmental engineering at the University of Colorado Boulder. She holds an MS and PhD in civil and environmental engineering from the University of California, Berkeley, a BS in applied mathematics from Harvey Mudd College. She teaches about and investigates urban air quality and works diligently to understand the impact of air pollution on public health and the environment. She is also an expert on indoor environmental quality, including airborne infectious disease transmission and control and air cleaning technologies. Dr. Miller is a member of the Academy of Fellows of the International Society for Indoor Air and Climate and has published over 70 peer-reviewed articles on air quality, authored a chapter on indoor air quality in the Environmental Engineering Handbook, and is an active scientist on Twitter and publishes open access as often as possible. And you should follow her on Twitter. She's very active and constantly posting very interesting articles relating to aerosols and virus transmission. And she's got an amazing team of colleagues at the University of Colorado. The other institution that is doing the duplicate study is at the University of Maryland. And just to tell you very briefly about how this got started, on April 25th, I sent an email to 16 music organizations to see if we could come together. I realized we were all working this virus situation in our own silos, and I thought maybe we could do better if we joined forces. And it quickly became almost overwhelming. But James Weaver and I partnered. He's with the NFHS, and we contacted Dr. Miller very early on and got some cost estimates, and then started raising money and raised all the money. And now the study is underway. So that's a little bit of the background. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Shelley Miller.
Thanks, everybody. And it's really a pleasure to be here. I will go ahead and share my presentation and start telling you a little bit about our study with a short background on aerosol science. As Mark mentioned, we have a really strong team at CU Boulder. I just want to mention my PI collaborators, Dr. Vance, Dr. Hertzberg, Dr. Tui, our great graduate student, Taya Stockman, our postdoc, Samir Patel, and our other grad student, Abhishek Kumir, and our undergrad, Kim Bauer, and my colleagues at the University of Maryland, Don Melton and Jelena. We really are grateful for these lead funders and everybody that's contributed and that is following our project. Just a short, quick aerosol primer to get us all on the same page. I'm an aerosol scientist and I'm actively studying aerosols my whole career. But we love this slide that came from the EPA, and I got it from my colleague Lindsay Marr, where we want to understand the size of the particle, because the size of the particle in an aerosol, which is simply a particle suspended in a gas, and because I'm an air pollution engineer, much of the air pollution is particles suspended in gas. We look at the diameter of a human hair is about 70 microns, and we can all see that size. When we go to find beach sand, we can still see it. It's about 90 microns. We go to something called PM10, that's 10 microns. And now we're getting into the size where you actually can't see. And this is a pollutant that EPA regulates. And then to a fine particle is PM2.5. And again, this is the size of PM2.5. And here is the size between 10 and about 200 nanometers, where we think the virus is existing in particles. And here are the different diameters of all of the airborne virus that we are concerned with in our current health system. Airborne viruses aren't naked. They're surrounded by respiratory fluid, which makes them a little bit larger than just the naked virus. And the size of the particle determines the lifetime in the atmosphere. In indoor environments, we estimate that a 50 micron particle can stay suspended for quite a while. And so anything smaller than that can stay suspended for quite a long time. And where it deposits in the respiratory system is also dependent on its size. We know very large particles get lodged up in the nose and the throat, and smaller particles go into the deep lung, where then they can cause deep lung issues like pneumonia. This diagram came from my colleague, Dr. Yugo Lee, and it's a really nice diagram that we appreciate about how airborne transmission occurs. An infected person will be talking or coughing, or in this case, singing or playing music, and a cloud of cloud of particles or an aerosol will be released. If you're very close, closer than social distancing norms, you can inhale some of the larger particles and you're right in the cloud of a very high concentration of aerosol. And if you move farther away, then you have removed yourself from the high concentration zone, and now you're in a zone where it's a little bit lower concentration, and you could still inhale an airborne particle that could have a virus, but your risk is much lower. The fomite route is thought to also cause COVID-19. We don't know if this is as dominant as the aerosol route, but this is why we encourage everyone to wash their hands. There's compelling evidence in the literature that shows transmission in crowded, poorly ventilated spaces is really what's driving a lot of the outbreaks. And these are just a few of the cases where we've been investigating, clusters from close contact in gyms, in ski towns, in tourist shops, in churches, and in an air-conditioned restaurant are some examples where we know the ventilation was not great and the aerosol built up and there was transmission. The ordinary speech aerosolizes significant quantities of respiratory particles, and some people we call super emitters and we have super spreading events. And a 10-minute conversation can generate a cloud of 6,000 aerosol particles. The short-range airborne route dominates during talking and coughing, during close contact, which is less than 2 meters. That's in our social distancing circle. Large droplet dominates when you're within 0.2 meters while talking, and that's when the big drops can fall on you. A little bit about outdoor transmission. One study found that only one case occurred after looking at all of these outbreaks in China, where a 27-year-old man had a conversation outdoor with an individual who had returned from Wuhan, and they had a long conversation outside, and this person got COVID. This is really the only case we've heard of outside transmission currently in the peer-reviewed literature. And most cases happen within homes. So here's the number of outbreaks on the y-axis for the left graph, and the cases per outbreak on the x-axis, showing the family members are the ones that really get most of the disease. And then the most times it's happening at home. This is a paper that I helped author showing a little bit about how you can mitigate exposure, which includes air cleaning and ventilation, plus social distancing and the use of an air cleaner if you need to increase your removal rates in your indoor space. Ventilation provides outdoor air to a space either by natural means, opening your window, or mechanical means because you have a central air conditioning system, and controls how quickly the room air is removed or replaced over time. The ventilation rates are recommended for different spaces by the association, the American Society for Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers, called ASHRAE, and most of facilities do follow ASHRAE guidelines. A little bit about air cleaners. They really work. I think that a lot of A lot of you may be considering them for your band rooms or for your rehearsal spaces. You want to make sure it's been certified. I like to use AHAM certification. That's the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers, and they will tell you what size of room to use the air cleaner in. This is an example of an air cleaner that I purchased. This one has a clean air delivery rate of 260 cubic feet per minute and the area for cleaning of around 700 square feet. And what I want to show you is how efficiently these air cleaners remove particles. This is a HEPA, a high efficiency particle air cleaner, and it will remove up to the 10 micron particle size, which is where we think the respiratory, and up to 50, obviously, for containing coronavirus at really close to 100%. We drop in efficiency around 0.3 microns, but many HEPA filters drop just about 99% efficiency there. Surgical face masks can prevent transmission, and I like this paper. There's many others that show this was a person shedding virus through the throat and the nose. And with the coronavirus, the droplet particles greater than 5 microns without a mask sampled from the person was significantly higher compared to when you had a mask. Similar for the aerosol particles, which were less than 5 microns. So the mask reduces the emission of the particles. And if you increase your clean outdoor air supply, you will see the percentage of infections going down. Building ventilation can be as effective as public health interventions. So for example, here at the top, when you increase your air exchange rate from 1 air change per hour to 7, the percentage of daily infections drops from close to 50% down to below 10%. And again, the attack rate will decrease, which is the infection rate, as you increase your air change rate in an indoor space. Okay, after that background, a little bit about our study where we're wanting to understand the aerosol emissions from our musicians. From aerosol emissions from musicians. Here's a French horn player, and she is playing right near our sampling port. This is our aerosol particle sizer and all of our other instrumentation as well. We sample the aerosol right here, and right now the exploratory phase is just trying to find where the airflow is and where the aerosol is coming from the performance. This is a diagram of the test chamber that we have, and this is from a top-down view where we would bring a musician in. They would play this is, for example, a clarinet or a trumpet, and they would play near the sampling lines. We provide cleaning capability in our chamber with 2 air cleaners that give us 15 additional air changes. Otherwise, we don't have ventilation in the test chamber. And then we sample right here, and this is the approximate size of our space. This is some preliminary data from a trumpet playing using the aerosol particle sizer, and it's showing here the total concentration versus time. The y-axis is not completely relevant at this point because we are just doing exploratory measurements in the plume of the trumpet. Later, we will be able to provide information about how many particles are being released with a breath or with a certain time of playing. So here we have a protocol that we follow with each musician. They play a high note into the trumpet. Then they put the bell close to the inlet, and at each time we see a peak in aerosol production. When we cover the bell with plastic, the peak decreases significantly. Then we ask the participant to just sit and do nothing so we can kind of get a background measurement again. And then we have the measurement where we cover the bell, and we also ask the performer to play in a mask with a slit so their mouthpiece can go into the slit. When we ask the performer to play with a mask and play near the bell again, here the trumpet player was now very tired from playing constantly for 6 minutes. And so what we can see is that the aerosol, again, does become elevated when you're tired and you don't have the bell covered anymore. Then we did some speaking, and then 1 meter away playing, but nothing covered. So this gives us a sense right now that yes, aerosols are being released by playing the trumpet, and that the bell cover and the mask can help reduce the aerosol release. Another example of data is this test again with the aerosol particle sizer, where we have singing, no mask, close range, and we have a peak of particle release along the same lines of the as the trumpet, the amount of particles being released. Singing with no mask and 1 meter away is the next measurement. Then we turned on the HEPA filters, and again that with singing, and that kept the concentration low. When we sang with a mask at close range, these were all low concentrations. When we played the clarinet at close range, we again got a peak. And then playing the clarinet about a 0.5 meter away, that allows for the dilution of the elevated aerosol concentration, and which is why social distancing is a good thing. But what we would like to do is keep the aerosol from being emitted in the first place, which is why we are currently preliminary recommending bell covers and masks. This is a size distribution data. So this is, quite a convoluted graph that us engineers really love. On the y-axis is the particle diameter. And the reason I'm showing this is because I do want to just emphasize that what we're seeing are particles of the size 10 microns and lower every time we do see some event with a musician or a singer. And the red shows the higher concentrations. I'd like to show you a video now of some of our work. So I'm going to stop sharing this presentation and start sharing a video. This video was made by my colleague Jean Hertzberg and our team, and she is a fluid mechanics, fluid visualization expert. We wrote a paper together on measuring the velocity of a cough a while ago. What we're doing here is visualizing using a technique called Schlieren. And what this does is detects density differences in fluid. And what we would like to see is where the fluid, the air, is coming from with each performer. And then we're assuming that aerosol is being carried within that plume. And there you can see the release right by the bell. And there we didn't see any flow with the cover on the trumpet. And that's deflecting, that screen is deflecting the flow. And this is looking at the finger holes. This was a mitigation idea that was provided to us to test However, we saw a lot of release around the air holes, the hand holes, where her hands are. And it was difficult to play with this bag. So those are
So you're
the,
breathing, your hands are giving off heat.
and now we'll do some singing.
325,600 minutes. How do you measure a year? In daylights, in sunsets, in midnights, in cups of coffee, in inches, in miles, in lanterns to light.
Now this is a screen that we're using to deflect the aerosol, so it's not projecting forward, but rather up and around. And here's the flow, what happens. Great, let me go back to finish our presentation. So this graph summarizes what we have done to date, and what I have done here is taking all of the data and tried to put it on a single graph for you, which is to show you what the 6-minute average concentration looks like with various mitigation approaches and with no mitigation. And we use a 6-minute average because each performance is about 6 minutes. And so what we have done is shown you what happens with no control. That would be the blue. And I've normalized the average number concentration to the highest number that we measured. So the oboe with no control was our highest particle release in our first phase of exploratory testing. We were not able to play a mass with the oboe. That is just, play the oboe with a mass. That was just not possible. And then the gray is a bell cover, and the yellow is actually the background. We don't have any error bars on these graphs. Usually we do that so I can show you the uncertainty. So what we are seeing here, for example, is that with the flute, no control, mask, bell cover, and background, they're all really quite similar in average aerosol number concentration. And the error bars would help us to show the actual dispersion of the data. But that was quite encouraging, considering we were concerned about, you know, emissions from all instruments. But this is one test with one flute player. Then the oboe, where we saw the highest release with no control. And then with the bell cover was very similar to background. Clarinet, again, was one of our higher emitters, and playing with the mask and then the bell cover did help to reduce the aerosol release. Saxophone was quite low, and we are going to want to repeat our saxophone test, and our bassoon test we were unable to do because the bassoonist was sick at the time. The trumpet was interesting, and the trumpet player tired here, so we don't think this is representative of what happens when you're tired and you play with a mask. It really doesn't help that much because you are just releasing a lot of aerosol, but the bell cover does help quite a bit. With the French horn, we have not tested with a bell cover. We used a mute, and we did see not too much effect with a mute to do the release, to do a reduction in the source aerosol. I'd like to finish up my talk by sharing with you the modeling results that we have, and these were done by my colleague at University of Maryland. What we did was look at a musician and a light wind outside, and also 2 indoor air cases. The first one, indoor case number 1, was where we do central ventilation, central heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, where we supply and exhaust this air at the ceiling. This is very typical for ventilation. And the indoor air case number 2 was where you supply the air at the ceiling and remove it at the floor. And the ventilation rates for the indoor cases were 3 air changes per hour, which is typical for an indoor space. So here's again the schematic of what the modeling setup looks like, where we have a big space for outdoor air release and then the 2 indoor cases. For the outdoor case, what we saw was that this is again for singing now with no mask, where the singer is facing the left and the wind is moving from left to right, that the aerosol plume follows behind the person, and it will extend to upwards of 2 meters, which is why we want to stay socially distant outside of this plume of higher concentration of aerosol. If we add an infection risk calculation on top of our modeling of aerosol concentration, now this tells you the risk of getting infected. And a dark blue means you have less than a 10% chance of getting infected, from 0 to 10%. And the next lighter blue color is up to 20%. And we see that the aerosol cloud of higher concentration does start developing after about 30 minutes. And then at 60 minutes, we see the cloud developed to the social distancing norm of 2 meters. For just a quick comment on outdoors, because we get this common question, do we need to limit our exposure time outdoors? We know the risks are much lower than indoors, and the outdoor conditions can be important. What's the direction of the breeze? And if there is a breeze, that's great. With social distancing and mask, exposure times outdoors can be a lot longer than indoors. We do recommend standing all facing one direction and wind on your back. So if you have that aerosol plume developing, and it will be in front of you, and the person in front of you would be facing forward, and it would be much better for them to not be breathing directly into the plume. And we do recommend that you can practice for longer than an hour, and I can say more about that later. For indoors, we see that this is now a typical ventilation scenario in an indoor space. We have the vertical section and the horizontal section, where the viral concentration is quickly building up in a very strange pattern throughout the room, depending on the ventilation airflow. And so we call these conditions basically well mixed, where the aerosol is highest near the source, and then it gets well mixed with the rest of the room. And here is indoor case 2, where we supply clean air right at the ceiling and then exhaust it at the floor. And again, we have the concentration basically pretty well mixed within the space. Animations of the indoor cases can be found here at this particular URL, and it shows you the particles being released around the space, and I'm happy to show that later if you're interested. I want to go to the infection risk now for the indoor cases, where we now have coupled this with an infection risk calculation using the Wells-Riley equation. And what we see is that at 30 minutes, the risk is quite low in the rest of the room, except really quite in the close proximity of the emitter. However, after 60 minutes, now the risk has spread to the rest of the room. And so based on these data, as well as other calculations and that we have done, we do recommend indoor practicing for under 30 minutes with a 15-minute break to allow the concentration in the room to decrease back to a lower level. And you can see it again here for the indoor case too, where after 30 minutes, we still have quite a low concentration throughout the rest of the room and therefore low risk. But after 60 minutes, the risk has doubled to 20% from a lower risk of between 0 and 10%. So finally, I'm going to sum this all up into evidence-based airborne infectious disease controls during epidemics, and I'll speak specifically to musicians in the next slide. Here, just generally, we need to practice wearing masks to reduce the source emissions and also your exposure. This is based right now on a precautionary principle, and we have seen in a lot of science recently that this is very effective for the COVID-19 pandemic. We minimize the number of people sharing the same indoor space, definitely washing hands and surfaces, increasing outdoor air ventilation rate and distributing effectively. And then we can add supplemental technology with air cleaning. And I'm not speaking about germicidal UV. I don't see a good application for that in this particular case, but I'm happy to discuss any questions about that further. And then specifically for musicians and singers, we would recommend wearing masks to play and sing. Oh, excuse me. They especially apply since we don't have this pandemic under control at all here in the US, unfortunately. We should play with bell and end covers to reduce source dispersion and spatially distance by 2 meters. And we should minimize indoor time to 30 minutes with 15-minute breaks for these kinds of high aerosol possible activities. Increase outdoor air ventilation rate again, and use air cleaning if minimal ventilation rate. And that is long enough for me to be speaking, and I'm thanks again for attending the session.
All right, thank you, Shelley, Dr. Miller. We do have some questions, I think a really good one. So Ben was looking at the spikes on our trumpet. And, you know, you see when he's playing the high note, you see this enormous spike into the air. And when you first look at that, that looks really daunting. It's like, oh my gosh, you know, just sending a ridiculous amount of aerosol into the air. So do you want to talk about that maybe that spike is not quite as concerning as it may appear at first, or just maybe talk a little bit about that?
So yes, let me think here. So right now what we're seeing is that there do seem to be certain instruments that have the ability based on the geometry and the way they're being played. And our hypothesis is that instruments with significant back pressure to produce a sound can produce more aerosol. And we do see additional aerosol being released from the trumpet, the French horn, the oboe, and the clarinet. And I want to also emphasize, though, that the concentrations that we've been showing are easily mitigated by using a bell cover and a mask. We don't see that the trumpet spike is as nearly as high as the oboe spike, for example, in the background. The oboe spike looks to be at least 5 times higher than the trumpet without any mitigation. But still, the numbers that we're showing they're not excessively high like you would see in a cough, but they are of the same order of magnitude that we can tell so far by other activities of concern, which is singing and talking. And so that's why we are moving towards, you know, mitigation recommendations. And I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and I think I might just add on to that momentary spike that we see is not indicative of total room particles.
Yeah.
So that's really what we're going to be looking at as we move forward in the study is, you know, how much builds up in the room. And then that will get us into mitigations, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the question came up on the chat about face shields, which you and I have been, you know, we've been going back and forth on this quite a bit. Specifically as it relates to flute, but let's talk about face shields just in general during the pandemic, because I'm starting to see out in public more and more people wearing face shields with no masks. So do you want to address that, or do you want me to get on my soapbox?
If I miss something, you can.
Sure.
So back in the beginning of my presentation, the point I wanted to make was that, you know, when you're within 0.2 meters while talking, there's these large droplets that are released by somebody talking, and the face shields are really only protective in that kind of scenario. So, for example, if any of you have watched Hamilton live on Disney Channel, you will see when King George is singing, lots of spit coming out, and that is what a shield is for. It does nothing for you when you're even within 6 feet, but you have moved away now, and you are now being exposed to smaller particles that easily make it through and around the face shields and into your breathing zone. It does nothing for those. And so I personally don't like shields because it gives people the opportunity to then think they don't need to wear a mask, and they do.
Great. That sort of leads us into the next question of the week, which you and I have been going, well, the team and James and I, which is the plexiglass partitions. So earlier in the summer, the Army band at West Point, very famous video and article came out where they partitioned each player into a giant plastic box, plexiglass. So if you would enlighten us on why that might not be such a good idea.
Yeah, so I'm a person who knows a lot about ventilation, and ventilation engineers don't like plexiglass for controlling an aerosol contaminant. They're very good, again, for the same reason as a shield. If you are standing in the supermarket checking out with your groceries, and the person who's checking you out is less than 2.2 meters away, 0.3 meters away, and they happen to speak with lots of spit, right? And the shield will help keep you from that. But what the plastic partitioning will do in a room is cause lots of strange airflow to happen. And then the aerosol can become concentrated in certain pockets where you don't know where that might happen. And it really creates dead zones and high zones of aerosol. And what we really need is to have the aerosol be able to move around the room and leave the room through the exhaust. And we don't want it to get trapped in certain locations where, if you have a shield up or a partition up between you and another person, you could be trapping the aerosol in very strange places. And so we don't recommend those with ventilated spaces.
Okay, great. So we've been talking a lot about recently with the team, and a lot of questions that James and I are getting on our separate Zooms about air changes per hour. So our ventilation systems in all of our rooms, whatever they might be, are generally, I think, 3 changes per hour is sort of the industry standard. But you need to find out from your facilities people, if you can, what your air change rate per hour is in your particular space that you're concerned with. If you find that it's under 3, that's not so good. 3 is sort of like a minimal-ish, we want at least 3. My particular rehearsal room, my band room, is 4 to 6. That's as close as they can tell me. But I've purchased additional standalone HEPA air purifiers that will plug in when we have people in the room that will give us an additional approximately 5 changes per hour. So I'm moving mine from 4 to 6 to 9 to 11, somewhere in that range. And using the mitigations that we're talking about, players have masks on, bell covers, and we're still working on how to deal with the keyholes on the woodwind instruments. I feel pretty comfortable being in an environment where there's such a high air change rate, and we're using the mitigations. So the background level of particles, aerosol in the air, should be pretty minimal. What say you, Dr. Miller?
Yeah, I agree. I think that is a really good approach. If we look at some work we did with the outbreak for the Skagit Valley coral case in Washington State, where there was 90% transmission in 2.5 hours. We estimate the air change rate in that space, after talking to their facilities managers and the people who installed the furnaces, to be less than an air change an hour. And if you increase that significantly, upwards of 10 air changes per hour, like Mark is doing, you'll drop the risk from transmission of about 90% to less than 20% from the aerosol, and that isn't even with masks. And so I think that's a really useful approach. Another way to drop the risk is also to limit the time. So what we also looked at in that case is, even if you have very low air changes, like the Skagit Valley Choral case of less than an air change an hour, and you are only practicing for 30 minutes as opposed to 2.5 hours, which is what the chorale did, that again dropped the risk from 90% to close to 20%. So, it's conservative, the 30-minute recommendation, but again, there are multiple ways to get at this problem that I think we all need to, use in our specific situation.
I'm going to drop a URL in the chat right now. This is the estimator that was developed at the University of Colorado with Dr. Miller's input, and one of her colleagues, I think, did the main sheet. But you can use this to give an estimate of risk based on your personal situation. So if you know your air change rate per hour, how many people are going to be in the room, and a few other variables, you can input that, and it will show you what the risk of infection might be after X amount of time. So you can watch that number go up and down as you input or change the data that you're using. So that's a really useful tool. We're going to try and refine that for music use. So once we have better understanding of how each individual instrument is producing aerosol, we hope to be able to have that estimator really drill down so that you can say, okay, I've got 8 trumpets, 4 trombones, 4 saxophones, 5 flutes, 8, and do your room that way and see what the risk is, and using all the mitigation factors that we've talked about.
Yeah, Mark, let me know if you want me to do a quick demo of that. I'm happy to.
Yeah, you want to pull? Well, we only have 1 minute, I think.
Okay.
So
Yep.
let me see. I'll just take a quick look at.
You have a little bit of time if you want.
All right. Yeah. Shelley, why don't you pull that up and share your screen?
Because I have it here, and it's there is a lot associated with it. But anyways, what I wanted to just point out is, for example, with the Skagit Valley Choral case, as I was talking to you, we have, the input parameters are, how many people in the room, how much are they breathing, what's the length of the event, what's the ventilation rate, what's the size of the room. And then the quanta emission rate is how many infectious particles are being released. This is our estimate from this singing case. It's very high. And what we want to be able to do is provide you with, an estimate for when you're playing a musical instrument. We don't have that quite now. But if this was how we did it with no masks, etc., the probability of infection is very high, 83%, and we got 50 cases, which is exactly what happened. If we go in and change the ventilation rate from 0.7 to Mark's, which is closer to 11, then we see the cases drop to only 14 from 24%. And then if we put everyone in a mask, they drop to 10. If we increase the effectiveness of that mask, we drop it to 7. And then we also have a tab for outdoors, where we did the Skagit Valley Choral case outdoors, and we see the risk is very, very low for 2.5 hours practice. And we have a classroom. This is a CU Boulder classroom as well. So I just wanted to show you that.
Great. Yeah, and what we've been talking about in a lot of these sessions is, we can never get risk of anything down to 0. What we're trying to do is get the risk level as low as we possibly can to whatever acceptable risk level that you feel is worth it to you, knowing that even on just any day of the week before the pandemic, there was a risk of getting the flu, getting who knows what else, measles, spinal meningitis. There's always some small risk. So we want to get that risk level down. And that's really the goal of this study. how much aerosol is being produced by the instruments, and also what can we do to mitigate the production of aerosol. Still some confusion on shields. I want to just maybe reiterate. So I'm going to turn sideways here and pretend I have a shield here, right? So if I pretend this is a shield, all I'm doing is deflecting the aerosols to the side, down, and possibly up. So we're not stopping the aerosol. A mask will actually stop the aerosol, or most of it, from coming out, because you've got it right over your mouth, and those aerosols, most of them are captured by the mask. And that's why if you wear one for any length of time, it becomes moist after a while. That's basically the collection of aerosols building up there. So it's effective. So no shields without masks. That's the bottom line on shields.
Agreed. Nice demonstration.
Okay, good. So yeah, please follow Shelly Miller on Twitter. I think it's Shelly.Miller.
It's Shelly M. Boulder.
Sorry, yep. Shelly M. Boulder on Twitter. She's got a fantastic Twitter feed going, all kinds of information on the science behind all of this, and a really good follow on Twitter. And she's got all of her colleagues on there. She's constantly retweeting their stuff too, so you can stay well informed on what's happening. And I think we're 3 minutes past, so we hope you enjoyed our session this morning, and great thanks to our superstar, Dr. Shelly Miller, for joining us this morning. And it was great to be with all of you back in Texas. At least my heart was with you for a little while. Great to be back with everyone.
Hang in there. Thank you.